"She's carrying my heir, Lisa," King David said, his voice a low, unyielding rumble that echoed off the cold marble of the pack house foyer. "The pack needs a future. You are my true mate, but you haven't given me a child." Lisa stared at the Alpha King, the man whose very soul was supposed to be inextricably woven with hers. Beside him stood Elena, a smug, calculated smile playing on her glossed lips as her hand rested protectively over the slight swell of her stomach. "You're choosing a pregnant mistress over the bond the moon goddess gave us?" Lisa whispered, her chest tightening with an agony that defied human language. David didn't flinch, his jaw set like granite. "I am choosing my legacy. You are relieved of your Luna duties." The silence that followed David's decree was absolute, suffocating the grand foyer. It wasn't the quiet of peace, but the heavy, oppressive stillness that precedes a devastating storm. Dozens of pack members stood in the shadows of the mezzanine, their eyes averted, their postures rigid. Not one stepped forward. Not one uttered a word in defense of the woman who had bled for them, healed them, and loved them for the past 5 years. Lisa's gaze remained locked on David. He was a striking man, imposing and broad-shouldered, carrying the absolute authority of the Alpha King. His eyes, usually swirling with the warm gold of their mate bond, were now a flat, impenetrable obsidian. He had built a fortress around his heart, and the gates were locked to her. "A legacy," Lisa echoed, the words tasting like ash on her tongue. She looked at Elena. The mistress didn't possess the raw, commanding aura of a wolf born to lead. She was an omega, pretty and pliant, wrapped in silks paid for by the pack's treasury. Elena leaned closer to David, her delicate fingers curling into the fabric of his dark shirt. It was a subtle display of ownership. A knife twisted slowly into Lisa's ribs. "It is done, Lisa," David said, his tone shifting from regal command to a flat, businesslike detachment that hurt worse than a scream. "The elders have already prepared the severance documents. You will be provided with a generous severance, enough to live comfortably as a lone wolf or to buy your way into a lesser pack." "Buy my way," Lisa breathed, a dark, humorless chuckle escaping her throat. The sound made David's jaw twitch, the only crack in his stoic facade. The physical pain of the rejection began as a low thrum at the base of her skull. The mate bond, a shimmering, invisible tether of energy that connected their minds and souls, was fraying. It felt as though someone had taken a pair of rusted shears to her nervous system. She felt a sharp, agonizing pull behind her ribs, causing her to stagger a half-step backward. David instinctively twitched, his hand rising a fraction of an inch as if to catch her, driven by the primal biology of an alpha seeing his mate in distress. But Elena shifted her weight, sighing softly, and David's hand dropped back to his side. The instinct was buried under the weight of his ambition. Lisa righted herself, her spine snapping perfectly straight. If she was to be cast out, she would not give them the satisfaction of watching her break. "Keep your money, David. The treasury belongs to the people of the Blood Moon Pack, not to pay off the king's discarded mistakes." She didn't wait for his reply. Turning on her heel, Lisa walked toward the grand mahogany doors. With every step, the bond stretched further, the spiritual fibers snapping one by one. Snap, snap, snap. By the time her hand touched the heavy brass handle, a coppery taste flooded her mouth. She swallowed hard, refusing to spit the blood onto the floor. The walk to her quarters, their quarters, was a blur of polished wood and averted eyes. Once inside the massive suite, the scent of him almost brought her to her knees. Sandalwood, rain, and the sharp tang of pine. It was the scent that had lulled her to sleep every night, the scent she had believed meant home. Now it was poison. She packed mechanically. 1 duffel bag, 3 pairs of denim jeans, heavy boots, a few thermal shirts, and a hunting knife her father had given her before he died. She left the diamonds, the Luna crowns, the silk dresses, and the gold. She stripped the regal rings from her fingers, setting them gently on the vanity. Next to them, she placed the severance documents, unsigned. When Lisa walked out of the pack house and into the biting autumn air, the sky was the color of bruised iron. A cold drizzle had begun to fall. At the edge of the tree line stood Thomas, the king's beta. His face was a mask of sheer grief. "Luna," Thomas choked out, taking a step forward. "I am not your Luna anymore, Thomas," Lisa said softly, stopping just a few feet from him. "He is a fool," the beta whispered, risking treason. The elders poisoned his mind with talk of bloodlines and failing dynasties. But a pack cannot survive without its heart. You are our heart. Hearts can be replaced, Lisa said, forcing a sad smile. "Look after the pups in the orphanage, Thomas. Ensure Elena doesn't cut their funding for her wardrobe." Thomas nodded, a single tear cutting through the rain on his cheek. "Where will you go?" "As far from his scent as the wind will carry me." Lisa stepped past him, crossing the invisible boundary line that marked the center of the Blood Moon territory. The moment her boot struck the neutral earth, the final thread of the mate bond severed. A soundless explosion detonated in her chest. Lisa dropped to her knees in the wet mud, gasping for air as her vision went entirely white. She retched, coughing violently until drops of crimson stained the fallen autumn leaves. The agony was absolute, a profound, hollow emptiness echoing in the space where her soul had once been shared. She stayed in the mud for 10 minutes, letting the rain wash the blood from her chin. Then, with a shaking groan, the former Luna of the Alpha King forced herself up. She didn't look back. She walked into the shadows of the ancient pines, letting the forest swallow her whole. 3 weeks later, the cold had turned brutal. Lisa dragged her boots through the frost-hardened mud of the northern wastes, a stretch of unclaimed territory that served as a buffer between the great packs. She was unrecognizable from the radiant Luna, who had once commanded the largest court in the country. Her clothes were torn, her cheekbones sharp and hollow, and her eyes were framed by deep, bruised exhaustion. Surviving in the wastes was a death sentence for a lone wolf. The territory was crawling with feral rogues, wolves who had lost their minds to the madness of isolation. Yet, they had kept their distance. The stench of a forcefully broken true-mate bond was a wretched, acrid thing, smelling of rotting ozone and dead flowers. It signaled tragedy, and even the mad ones recognized the scent of a wolf who had nothing left to lose. But sheer willpower could only fuel a starving body for so long. A jagged cramp seized her abdomen, sharper and deeper than the hunger pangs she had grown accustomed to. Lisa stumbled, catching herself against the rough bark of a dead oak tree. She pressed a hand to her stomach, her breathing shallow and ragged. The world tilted violently on its axis. Just a little further, she told herself. Just across the river. Across the foaming, ice-choked rapids lay the borders of the Silverwood Pack. They were a notoriously reclusive and fiercely territorial pack, led by Alpha Marcus. Whispers in the royal courts painted Marcus as a ruthless warlord, a giant of a man who tolerated no weakness and bowed to no king. If she crossed the border, she would likely be taken prisoner. But a cell in Silverwood offered warmth, and right now she was freezing to death from the inside out. She took one step toward the riverbank, The cramp flared again, this time blinding her with a white-hot flash of agony. Lisa's knees buckled. She hit the frozen earth hard, the impact jarring her teeth. The cold seeped through her clothes instantly, numbing her limbs. As her vision began to tunnel, darkening at the edges, she heard the heavy, synchronized crunch of boots on frost. Well, what do we have here? A rough voice called out. Lisa lacked the strength to lift her head. Through her fading peripheral vision, she saw the massive paws of 3 enormous timber wolves step into view, their hackles raised. Border Patrol. They shifted back to their human forms, standing over her in thick, fur-lined coats. She smells like death, one of the guards muttered, nudging her side with the toe of his boot. Rogue? No. A deeper, impossibly resonant voice commanded from the tree line. Look at her neck. The patrol parted instantly, lowering their heads in deference. A man stepped forward, moving with a fluid, lethal grace that belonged to a predator at the very top of the food chain. Alpha Marcus was taller than David, broader, with eyes the color of a stormy winter sea and hair as black as a raven's wing. A jagged scar ran from his jawline down into the collar of his coat, a testament to battles fought on the front lines, not from a throne. Marcus knelt beside her in the dirt, completely unbothered by the freezing mud. He gently brushed the tangled, damp hair away from the side of her neck. There, scarred and brutally disfigured, was the faded crescent mark of the Alpha King. The guards gasped. Is that the blood moon Luna? Marcus murmured, his deep voice vibrating with dangerous curiosity. He looked down at Lisa's pale, trembling face. Her eyes were barely open, glassy and unfocused. What did he do to you, little wolf? He asked softly. Lisa's lips parted, but no sound came out. The darkness rushed in, pulling her under the ice. When she finally clawed her way back to consciousness, the first thing she registered was the smell. Pine needles, wood smoke, and a sharp, clean, antiseptic scent. She was lying on a cot piled high with thick woolen blankets. The air was warm, heated by a crackling cast-iron stove in the corner of a rustic cabin. Drink this, a gentle voice ordered. Lisa blinked, her vision slowly coming into focus. An older woman with kind, weathered eyes and the unmistakable aura of a pack healer was leaning over her, holding a wooden cup of steaming broth. Lisa struggled to sit up, her muscles screaming in protest. Where? Her voice cracked, dry as sandpaper. You're in Silverwood territory. A booming voice answered from the doorway. Alpha Marcus stood leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his massive chest. He filled the space entirely, a looming mountain of muscle and authority. He wasn't looking at her with pity, but with a sharp, calculating intensity. I found you dying on my border, Marcus said, stepping into the room. The floorboards creaked under his weight. My healer says you're severely malnourished, frostbitten, and suffering from the physical shock of a violently severed true-mate bond. King David cast you out. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Yes, Lisa rasped, taking the cup from the healer with trembling hands. I am sorry for trespassing. I'll leave as soon as I can stand. Marcus scoffed, a dark, rumbling sound. You wouldn't make it a mile. You're staying until you're healed? I don't turn away those who have been wronged by the king's arrogance. He paused, his stormy eyes narrowing slightly. But you should know, Luna. It seems your former mate is not only arrogant, but a profound fool. Lisa frowned, confused, clutching the warm cup. What do you mean? The healer placed a gentle hand on Lisa's shoulder, offering a sad, knowing smile. Alpha David exiled you because you couldn't give him an heir, the healer said softly. But you didn't know, did you? Lisa's heart stuttered to a halt. Her breathing hitched as the healer's words hung in the warm, wood-smoke-scented air. She looked down at her hands, then slowly moved a trembling palm to rest over her stomach, remembering the agonizing cramps that had brought her to her knees in the woods. "Know what?" Lisa whispered, dread and a terrifying spark of hope warring in her chest. Marcus pushed off the doorframe, taking a slow step toward the bed. "You are pregnant, Lisa," the Alpha said quietly. "You are carrying the true heir to the Blood Moon throne." The word pregnant hung in the cabin, heavy and suffocating. Lisa stared at Alpha Marcus, her chest rising and falling in shallow, erratic bursts. The phantom pain of the severed mate bond, a constant, dull ache behind her ribs, was suddenly eclipsed by a tidal wave of sheer, paralyzing terror. "No," Lisa whispered, the wooden cup shaking so violently in her grip that the warm broth sloshed over the rim, burning her knuckles. "No. The royal physicians tested me. For 5 years they said my wolf was dormant. They said I was barren." Marcus didn't flinch. His stormy gray eyes remained locked on hers, devoid of the pity she despised. He took the cup from her trembling hands and set it on the nightstand. "Pack physicians answer to the king," Marcus rumbled, his voice low and deliberate. "And kings hear what they wish to hear, or what their advisors orchestrate. My healer answers only to the truth of the body. You are nearly 2 months along." Lisa pressed both palms against her flat stomach. Beneath her bruised and shivering skin, a spark of life was weaving itself into existence. David's child, the true heir to the Blood Moon Pack. The devastating irony tasted like copper on her tongue. David had shattered her soul, ripped her from her home, and cast her into the freezing wastes to secure a legacy that she had been carrying all along. A sudden, fierce heat bloomed in her chest. It wasn't the warmth of the cabin's iron stove. It was the primal, absolute fire of a mother wolf waking in the dark. "He cannot know," Lisa said. Her voice lost its rasp, ringing out with a startling clarity that made the elderly healer pause by the hearth. Lisa looked up, her gaze locking with the formidable Alpha of Silverwood. "If David discovers this, he will march on your borders. He will take my pup, hand it to Elena to raise as a trophy, and kill me to tie up the loose ends of his mistake." Marcus crossed his massive arms, leaning back slightly. He studied her, mapping the sharp angles of her pale face and the desperate, burning defiance in her eyes. "Silverwood does not fear the Blood Moon," he stated, a dangerous edge bleeding into his tone. "David is a politician playing at being a warrior. If he crosses my borders, the snow will run red. I am not asking you to fight a war for me," Lisa countered, pushing herself up until she was sitting upright against the rough-hewn headboard. The effort made her dizzy, but she refused to lie down. "I am a rogue, a trespasser. By all ancient laws, you should have killed me at the river. Why did you bring me here?" "Because I despise waste," Marcus said flatly. "And I despise men who throw away their greatest assets for the sake of a pretty face and a pliable ego. You were the heart of that pack, Lisa. Even in the north, we heard tales of the Luna who quelled the border riots without shedding a single drop of blood." He took a slow step closer, the sheer physical presence of him demanding the room's oxygen. "I'm offering you asylum," Marcus continued. "Silverwood is harsh. The winters last 8 months, the soil is unforgiving, and my people do not respect titles. They respect grit. You can stay here. You will be protected, but you will not be a queen. You will work for your keep." Lisa didn't hesitate. The thought of silken sheets and jewel-encrusted crowns made her nauseous. "I know how to heal," she said, looking toward the older woman by the fire. "I know herb lore, field medicine, and I can ration supplies better than any quartermaster. I will earn my breath, Alpha Marcus. I only ask for your silence regarding my child." A microscopic shift occurred in Marcus's stoic expression, a fleeting glint of deep, profound respect. He gave a single, slow nod. "Then it is settled. Rest, Lisa. Tomorrow you begin." As he turned to leave, Lisa's voice stopped him at the threshold. "Alpha." Marcus paused, glancing back over his broad shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, the defensive wall she had hastily erected cracking just enough to let the raw gratitude bleed through. "Don't thank me yet, little wolf," Marcus murmured, his eyes lingering on the scarred ruin of her mating mark. Winter is just beginning. The Silverwood winter was a brutal, relentless beast that chewed through the weak and tested the strong. For Lisa, it was a crucible that forged her into something entirely new. She shed the ghosts of her past in the healer's den. When the snow piled 8 feet high against the cabin walls, Lisa was awake before dawn, grinding poultices of wintergreen and willow bark. When the border patrols returned with slashed limbs from feral rogue skirmishes, it was Lisa who stitched their skin with a steady hand and a calm voice. She didn't demand respect. She bled for it. And slowly, the fiercely territorial wolves of Silverwood stopped calling her the Stray and started calling her by her name. As her belly swelled with the turning of the seasons, so too did her quiet bond with Marcus. He was a man of few words, leading through action and an imposing presence. Yet, she found him seeking out the healer's den with increasing frequency. He would bring fresh game, rare winter herbs scavenged from the high peaks, or simply sit by the fire in comfortable, companionable silence while she worked. He never encroached. He never pitied her. He simply stood as a steady, immovable monolith in her chaotic world. When the phantom pains of her severed bond flared, leaving her gasping and clutching her chest in the dead of night, she would often find Marcus standing guard outside her cabin window the next morning, leaving only large boot prints in the snow. When the spring thaw finally broke the ice on the river, Lisa's water broke with it. The labor was agonizing, a grueling 30-hour marathon that pushed her weakened body to the absolute brink. Through the haze of pain, she clung to the memory of David's cold eyes, using the anger as fuel to push. Outside the healer's den, Alpha Marcus paced. The timber floorboards groaned under his restless weight. His elite guard stood by, watching their usually stoic leader with silent astonishment. When a piercing, furious wail finally shattered the quiet of the morning, Marcus stopped dead. The healer opened the door, her apron stained, a weary but triumphant smile on her face. "A girl, Alpha. A strong, loud girl." Marcus stepped into the room. Lisa was slumped back against the pillows, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her chest heaving. Bundled in thick gray wool in her arms was a tiny, squirming life. Lisa looked up as Marcus approached. The exhaustion in her eyes gave way to a fierce, territorial glow. But as Marcus knelt beside the bed, making himself incredibly small, her defenses lowered. "She has your eyes," Marcus rumbled, his voice incredibly soft. He extended a massive, calloused finger. The newborn immediately ceased crying, reaching out with a tiny, blind fist to wrap around it. The contrast between the lethal warlord and the fragile infant made Lisa's breath catch in her throat. "Her name is Lyra," Lisa whispered, a tear finally escaping to track through the grime on her cheek. Marcus looked at the exhausted mother, his stormy eyes softening into something profound and unspoken. "Lyra of Silverwood," he decreed quietly. "She will never know the cold, Lisa. I swear it." 3 years passed in a blink. The bitter memories of the Blood Moon Pack faded into a dull scar, replaced by the vibrant reality of her daughter. Lyra was a hurricane of a child, fiercely independent, with a laugh that echoed through the pine forests. She possessed the undeniable aura of a born alpha, her presence commanding even at the age of 3. One crisp autumn afternoon, Lisa was hanging herbs to dry on the porch when a commotion at the tree line caught her attention. Thomas, the Blood Moon Beta, looking aged and weary, was being escorted into the clearing by 3 massive Silverwood guards. Lisa's heart slammed against her ribs. She dropped the bundle of sage, wiping her hands on her apron as she stepped forward. Thomas stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of her. She was no longer the frail, broken Luna he had watched walk into the rain. She stood tall, dressed in sturdy leathers and wool, radiating a calm, undeniable power. Before Thomas could speak, a blur of motion raced past him. Lyra, her dark hair flying, sprinted across the compound, fleeing a mock chase from one of the younger wolves. Alpha Marcus emerged from the command cabin, stepping onto the dirt path just as Lyra barreled toward him. He dropped to one knee, catching the laughing toddler effortlessly and tossing her high into the air. "Papa!" Lyra shrieked in pure, unadulterated joy as she landed back in his massive arms. She threw her little arms around his thick neck, pressing her cheek against his scarred jaw. Thomas gasped, the sound loud and sharp in the quiet clearing. His eyes darted from the child, who bore the unmistakable royal features of King David, to the Silverwood Alpha, and finally to Lisa. The secret was out. The silence in the Silverwood clearing was absolute, heavy enough to crush bone. Thomas stared at the child bouncing happily in Alpha Marcus's arms. Lyra's dark, unruly hair and the piercing, aristocratic gold of her eyes were a mirror image of the king who had cast her mother out. Yet, the way she clung to the scarred, towering Alpha of the North, the absolute trust and adoration in her small face, spoke of a bond forged in love, not biology. "Papa, look, I outran the guards," Lyra boasted, pointing a chubby finger at the panting teenage wolf who had been chasing her. Marcus let out a low, rumbling chuckle that seemed to vibrate the very ground. "You did, little storm. You are faster than the winter wind." He kissed the crown of her head before gently setting her down on the porch next to Lisa. "Go inside with your mother, Lyra." Lisa didn't say a word. She placed a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder, her eyes locked on Thomas. The warmth of the autumn afternoon had vanished, replaced by the lethal, calculating cold of a cornered mother. She ushered Lyra behind the heavy oak door of the cabin, the click of the latch echoing like a gunshot. When Lisa turned back to the yard, Marcus had already closed the distance between himself and the Blood Moon Beta. The Silverwood guards had subtly shifted their positions, their hands resting on the hilts of their hunting knives. "Thomas," Lisa said, stepping down from the porch. Her voice was entirely devoid of the warmth she had once held for this man. "Why are you here?" Thomas seemed to struggle for breath, his eyes darting from the closed cabin door back to Lisa. He looked 10 years older than the last time she had seen him. The gray in his hair had thickened, and the proud posture of a royal beta had bowed under an invisible weight. "I didn't know," Thomas whispered, his voice trembling. He fell to his knees in the dirt, bowing his head. "By the goddess, Lisa, I swear on my life, I didn't know you were with child. If I had known, I would have dragged you back myself. I would have defied him. If you had dragged me back, Elena would have poisoned my food before the first snow. Lisa stated plainly, the brutal truth of the royal court hanging in the air. Get up, Thomas. The North does not care for bowing. Marcus crossed his arms, his massive frame blocking Thomas's view of the cabin. Speak quickly, Blood Moon. You crossed my borders uninvited. The only reason my patrols didn't leave your throat in the snow is because Lisa once called you a friend. Thomas stood slowly, dusting the dirt from his trousers. He looked at Lisa, his eyes pleading. The pack is dying, Lisa. King David, his alpha spark is failing. Without a true mate to ground his spirit, his wolf is turning feral. The crops are blighted, the border skirmishes with rogues are bleeding us dry, and the people are losing faith. He has Elena, Lisa said coldly, and his legacy. Thomas let out a bitter, hollow laugh. Elena bore him a son, but the child is sickly, weak. The pack healers say he will never shift. The elders are demanding David step down. He is terrified, Lisa. He sent me to find you, to beg you to return and heal the pack. He thinks if he reinstates you as Luna, the goddess will forgive his transgression. He wants his healer back. Marcus growled, the sound vibrating with lethal menace. He wants to use her to plug the holes in his sinking ship. He doesn't know about the girl, Thomas said quickly, looking at Marcus with wide, fearful eyes. He only wants Lisa. But now, goddess, if he finds out he has a true-born, healthy heir, he will never find out. Lisa stepped forward, her presence suddenly as imposing as the alpha beside her. Because you are going to go back to the Blood Moon, Thomas, and you are going to tell King David that you found me dead in the wastes. You will tell him my bones are scattered in the frost. Thomas recoiled as if struck. I cannot lie to my alpha. A blood oath binds me to the truth. If he asks me directly, the magic of the bond will force the words from my mouth. Marcus moved with a speed that defied his massive size. In a blur of motion, he had Thomas pinned against the trunk of a towering pine, his forearm pressed securely against the beta's windpipe. Thomas gagged, his hands scrabbling uselessly against Marcus's unyielding grip. Then you had better ensure he doesn't ask the right questions, Marcus whispered, his stormy eyes flashing with the golden ring of his own alpha wolf rising to the surface. Listen to me very carefully, Beta. That child is Lyra of Silverwood. She is my daughter. If David brings his army to my borders to claim what he threw away, I will not just defeat him. I will mount his head on a spike at the edge of the river, and I will burn the Blood Moon pack house to the ground. Marcus released him. Thomas collapsed to the dirt, gasping for air, rubbing his bruised throat. Leave, Lisa commanded, her voice devoid of any remaining sympathy. And never return. Thomas staggered to his feet. He looked at Lisa one last time, a profound sorrow etching lines into his face. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of the terrifying reality he was returning to, and turned to walk back toward the tree line. The Silverwood guards shadowed him, ensuring he left their lands. Lisa watched him go until he was swallowed by the dense pine forest. A violent shiver racked her frame, the adrenaline suddenly abandoning her system. She swayed slightly on her feet. Instantly, Marcus's hand was on the small of her back, warm, steady, and immovable. He will tell him, Marcus said quietly, stating a fact rather than a fear. Lisa leaned into his touch, closing her eyes as the cool autumn wind swept through the clearing. I know. The weight was worse than the betrayal. For the next 3 weeks, the Silverwood pack lived on a knife's edge. The crisp autumn air turned brittle and biting, signaling an early, violent winter. Marcus doubled the border patrols, pulling his elite warriors from the hunting lines and stationing them along the frozen rapids that separated their lands from the neutral wastes. Inside the healer's cabin, the tension was a physical entity. Lisa threw herself into her work, grinding herbs with a frantic, punishing energy. She prepared trauma kits, rolled endless yards of bandages, and stockpiled coagulants. She was not just a mother protecting her child. She was the Luna of Silverwood in all but name, preparing her people for war. Lyra, perceptive despite her young age, sensed the shift in the atmosphere. She clung closer to Lisa, her usual boisterous laughter subdued. Late one evening, after Lyra had finally succumbed to sleep in her cot, Lisa sat by the cast-iron stove, her hands stained green from willow bark. The door to the cabin opened quietly, admitting a swirl of snowflakes and the massive, snow-dusted form of Alpha Marcus. He shrugged off his heavy fur cloak, hanging it on the peg by the door, and walked over to the fire. He didn't speak immediately. He just sat in the heavy wooden chair opposite her, staring into the flames. The exhaustion in his eyes was palpable, a testament to the sleepless nights spent strategizing with his war council. "The river is freezing solid." Marcus finally spoke, his voice a low rumble that blended with the crackle of the fire. "It will bear the weight of an army by tomorrow night." Lisa paused her grinding. She looked at his hands, large, scarred, and capable of immense violence, yet the same hands that painstakingly braided Lyra's hair every morning. "Do you regret it?" Lisa asked softly, her voice barely louder than the popping embers. "Taking us in. If you had left me in the mud, you wouldn't be facing a war." Marcus shifted his gaze from the fire to her. His stormy gray eyes were entirely devoid of hesitation. "The only thing I regret is that I wasn't the one to break David's jaw the day he insulted you." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, closing the distance between them. "I have fought for territory, for pride, and for survival, Lisa. But I have never had something worth dying for until you and Lyra crossed my borders." Lisa's breath caught in her throat. For 3 years, their relationship had been a dance of mutual respect, unspoken boundaries, and quiet companionship. But in the shadow of impending war, the pretenses were burning away. "My mate bond is dead, Marcus," she whispered, a sudden, terrifying vulnerability seizing her. "My soul was scarred. I don't know if I can ever." "I am not asking for a magical tether forged by the goddess," Marcus interrupted, his voice fiercely gentle. He reached out, his large, calloused fingers wrapping around her small, herb-stained hand. "I don't need a shimmering thread in my mind to know that you are my equal. I want the woman who stitched my warriors back together. I want the mother who raised my daughter to be fearless. I want you, Lisa, just as you are." A tear slipped free, carving a clean path through the dried dust on her cheek. She didn't pull her hand away. Instead, she turned her palm upward, tangling her fingers with his. It wasn't the electric, overpowering shock of a fated mate bond. It was something profoundly deeper. It was the warmth of a hearth in a blizzard. It was a choice. "When this is over," Lisa whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "If we survive this, yes." Marcus brought her knuckles to his lips, pressing a firm, lingering kiss against her skin. "We will survive," he vowed. The quiet intimacy of the cabin was suddenly shattered by a sound that made Lisa's blood run cold. A woo-oo. It was the deep, resonant howl of a Silverwood scout echoing from the southern ridge. But it wasn't a standard patrol call. It was a rapid, high-pitched crescendo that ended in a sharp bark. The warning howl, Marcus was on his feet in a microsecond, the tender warmth in his eyes instantly replaced by the lethal, calculating glare of a warlord. He grabbed his fur cloak and his broadsword from the corner of the room. "Stay inside," Marcus ordered, his alpha tone ringing through the small space, commanding absolute obedience. "Lock the door. Do not come out, no matter what you hear." Lisa stood up, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Marcus," he paused at the door, looking back at her. "Do not let him take her," she pleaded, the fierce mother wolf warring with the terrified woman. "He will have to pry her from my cold, dead hands," Marcus promised. He threw the door open and vanished into the swirling snow. A moment later, the deep, guttural blast of the Silverwood war horns echoed through the valley, shaking the snow from the pine branches. King David had arrived. The frozen river separating Silverwood from the wastes gleamed like a polished sheet of obsidian under the moonlight. The silence of the winter night had been utterly obliterated by the thundering cadence of marching boots and the low, guttural snarls of shifting wolves. King David stood at the vanguard of the Blood Moon army, but he looked nothing like the resplendent, imposing monarch who had banished Lisa 3 years ago. His skin was sallow, drawn tight over his cheekbones. The shadows beneath his eyes were profound, speaking of sleepless nights and the gnawing rot of a failing alpha spark. Without the grounding presence of a true mate, his inner wolf was fracturing, turning erratic and feral. His once proud army mirrored his decay. They were numerous, but their movements lacked the lethal synchronization of a united pack. Across the expanse of ice stood the Silverwood defense. They were vastly outnumbered, but they stood like statues carved from granite. At their center was Alpha Marcus. He hadn't bothered to shift into his wolf form. He stood tall in his dark armor, a massive broadsword resting casually over his right shoulder. The aura he projected was suffocatingly heavy, a pure, unadulterated dominance that made the front lines of the Blood Moon pack visibly flinch. David stepped forward, his boots crunching loudly on the frost-heaved bank. "Marcus of Silverwood," he shouted, his voice cracking slightly on the crisp air. "I have no quarrel with the North. Hand over the woman, and we will leave your borders untouched." Marcus didn't move. He let the silence stretch, forcing David's anxiety to fester. When he finally spoke, his deep voice carried effortlessly across the ice, vibrating with cold amusement. "I see no woman belonging to you, David. I only see a desperate king chasing ghosts because his own kingdom is crumbling beneath his feet." David's jaw tightened, a feral twitch pulling at his lips. "She is my true mate. By the laws of the goddess, she belongs to the Blood Moon. You severed that bond in front of your entire court for the sake of a mistress." Marcus countered, his tone hardening into something lethal. "You threw her into the wastes to die. The goddess has no jurisdiction here, David. Only I do. And I say you cross this ice. You don't walk back." "My pack is dying," David roared, the polished veneer of the king finally shattering, revealing the terrified, broken wolf beneath. "Elena's pup is sickly. The land is barren. I need my healer back, Marcus. I will pay any ransom, grant any territory. Just give her to me. She is not a commodity to be traded for your salvation." Marcus growled, finally stepping onto the ice. The sound of his heavy boots striking the frozen river echoed like a death knell. He lowered his broadsword, the steel catching the moonlight. "She is the heart of Silverwood now. And if you want her, you will have to carve your way through me." David's eyes flashed a sickly, frantic yellow. With a roar of pure, desperate rage, he signaled the charge. The Blood Moon forces surged forward. a tidal wave of fur and steel pouring onto the ice. But Silverwood was ready. Marcus didn't roar. He simply gave a sharp, tactical hand signal. From the high ridges flanking the river, a rain of heavy, iron-tipped arrows descended, shattering the ice in strategic locations. The vanguard of David's army screamed as the frozen surface gave way beneath them, plunging them into the freezing, rapid currents below. The charge broke into chaos. Marcus and his elite guard engaged those who made it across, fighting with a brutal, terrifying efficiency. Marcus was a force of nature, his broadsword weaving a deadly arc that kept the Blood Moon warriors at bay. But David was not fighting to win a war. He was fighting a frantic, singular mission. Utilizing the chaos, he shifted into his massive, dark brown wolf. Ignoring the battle lines, he used the bodies of his own fallen warriors as stepping stones to clear the broken ice, charging wildly into the dense tree line of Silverwood territory. He was following the faint, residual phantom ache in his chest, the ghost of a bond that pointed straight toward the healer's cabin. The cabin was silent, save for the crackling of the fire and the ragged, shallow breathing of the woman standing by the door. Lisa stood in the center of the room, Lyra tucked securely behind her legs. The child was uncharacteristically quiet, her small hands clutching the rough wool of Lisa's skirts, her golden eyes wide and perceptive. In Lisa's hand was the heavy, bone-handled hunting knife her father had given her. Her knuckles were white. Outside, the distant sounds of battle were muffled by the dense pines. But the sudden snapping of branches just outside the cabin window made Lisa's blood turn to ice. The heavy oak door rattled violently, then shattered inward with a splintering crash. David stood in the doorway, chest heaving, his human form covered in snow and blood that wasn't his own. He looked wildly around the small room, his frantic gaze finally locking onto Lisa. For a split second, relief washed over his hollow, desperate features. He took a stumbling step forward, reaching out a trembling, blood-stained hand. "Lisa," he gasped, his voice a pathetic, broken rasp. "Praise the goddess. You're alive." Lisa didn't lower the knife. She stood her ground, her posture rigid, radiating a cold, unforgiving fury. "Take one more step, David, and I will put this blade through your throat." David stopped, looking genuinely bewildered by her hostility. The arrogance of the Alpha King blinded him even now. He truly believed his desperation would erase his betrayal. "Put it down, Lisa. I'm taking you home. The elders were wrong. Elena it was a mistake. Her son is weak. He won't survive the winter. The pack is rebelling. I need you to fix it. I need my Luna." "I am not your Luna," Lisa said, her voice eerily calm, cutting through his frantic rambling. "And you do not have a home for me. You destroyed it 3 years ago when you chose a mistress over your mate." "I am commanding you," David suddenly roared, the feral edge of his failing wolf surfacing. He stepped fully into the room, his eyes flashing gold. "You will return with me and do your duty. You will heal my pack and you will give me a proper, healthy heir. You already threw your heir away." The words hung in the air, freezing the oxygen in the room. David blinked, his frantic anger stalling. "What?" Lisa shifted slightly, stepping just enough to the side to reveal the child standing behind her. Lyra peeked around her mother's legs. She was a mirror image of the man standing in the doorway. She had his exact, raven-dark hair, the proud, aristocratic slope of his jaw, and most damning of all, the piercing, luminous gold eyes of the royal bloodline. The child did not look frightened. She looked at the bleeding, desperate intruder with the cold, assessing glare of a born alpha. David froze. All the color drained from his already pale face. The breath left his lungs in a hollow, ragged wheeze. His eyes darted from Lisa's stoic face down to the 3-year-old girl, his mind struggling to process the impossible reality standing in front of him. He could smell it now. Beneath the scent of wood smoke and wintergreen, beneath the heavy, protective scent of Marcus that clung to them both, was the undeniable, biological scent of his own blood. "No," David whispered, stumbling backward a half-step as if he had been physically struck. "No. The physician said, they said you were barren. You were pregnant when you cast me into the freezing rain to die." Lisa finished for him, her voice dripping with absolute venom. "Yes." David's hands began to shake violently. He dropped to his knees on the splintered floorboards, the devastating weight of his own hubris finally crushing him. He had sacrificed his true mate, shattered his soul, and doomed his pack for a legacy he had already possessed. He reached out a trembling hand toward the child, tears tracking through the dirt and blood on his face. My daughter," David choked out, a sob tearing at his throat. Lyra frowned, stepping completely out from behind her mother. She looked at the sobbing king, unimpressed. Then she looked past him, toward the shattered doorway. Her face instantly broke into a radiant, relieved smile. "Papa!" Lyra cried out. David gasped, a flicker of hope flaring in his chest, thinking the child somehow recognized her blood. But Lyra didn't run to him. She ran right past him. David turned his head, watching in absolute soul-shattering horror as Alpha Marcus stepped through the ruined doorway. Marcus was covered in gore, his breathing heavy, but his eyes softened instantly as he dropped his broadsword and caught the little girl, lifting her securely against his armor. "I've got you, little Storm," Marcus murmured, pressing a kiss to her dark hair before turning his terrifying, stormy gaze down to the broken king kneeling on his floor. The silence in the shattered cabin was heavier than the winter storm raging outside. The freezing wind howled through the splintered remnants of the oak door, swirling snow across the blood-stained floorboards. Yet the temperature in the room seemed to drop entirely from the sheer, suffocating gravity of Alpha Marcus's presence. David remained on his knees, his hands trembling violently against the rough wood. His aristocratic features were contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated agony. The golden eyes of the Alpha King, once so proud and commanding, were wide and frantic, locked on the little girl securely tucked against Marcus's armor. "Papa, the bad man, broke our door," Lyra whispered, her small arms wrapping tightly around Marcus's thick neck. She buried her face in the fur collar of his cloak, entirely unbothered by the blood on his armor, seeking only the absolute safety of the man who had raised her. The word Papa struck David with the force of a physical blow. He let out a ragged, suffocating gasp, his chest caving inward. "No," David wheezed, scrambling forward slightly, his bloodied hands reaching out in a pathetic, desperate plea. "No. She is mine. She has my eyes. She is the heir to the blood moon. You stole her from me, Marcus." Marcus didn't draw his sword. He didn't need to. He simply shifted his weight, and the raw, oppressive dominance of the Silverwood Alpha flooded the small room. It wasn't the manic, desperate energy of a failing king. It was the ancient, terrifying weight of the northern mountains. David's inner wolf, already fractured and starving from the loss of its true mate, whimpered and forced him to press his palms flat against the floor in involuntary submission. "I stole nothing," Marcus rumbled, his voice vibrating with a lethal calm that shook the dust from the rafters. He gently set Lyra down, nudging her behind his massive legs to stand with Lisa. "You threw a diamond into the freezing mud, David. I simply picked it up and gave it the setting it deserved." "I didn't know," David screamed, the polished veneer of his royal upbringing entirely destroyed. Tears of sheer panic and regret carved clean lines through the grime on his face. He looked past Marcus, finding Lisa's stoic, unforgiving gaze. "Lisa, please, I swear by the goddess, I didn't know you were carrying her. If I had known, I never would have let you go." Lisa stepped forward. The trembling, heartbroken woman who had dragged herself out of the Blood Moon pack house 3 years ago was dead. In her place stood a queen forged in ice and iron. She didn't look at her former mate with anger. She looked at him with a cold, hollow pity that cut deeper than any blade. "That is exactly the point, David," Lisa said, her voice piercing through his frantic sobs. "You wouldn't have kept me. You would have kept the vessel carrying your legacy. You would have kept your prize, and you still would have kept your mistress. You destroyed our bond for convenience, and now you are paying the price." "My pack is dying," David choked out, hitting his fist against the floorboards. "Elena's son is weak. The elders will strip me of my crown by the spring thaw. I need my daughter. I need my Luna. I can fix this, Lisa. I will banish Elena. I will make you queen. Lyra will have everything." "She already has everything," Marcus interrupted, stepping into the space between David and his family. The warlord stared down at the broken king. "She has a pack that does not bend. She has a mother who is a force of nature. And she has a father who would burn the world to ash before letting a coward like you touch a single hair on her head." David stared up at Marcus, the final, crushing realization settling into his bones. There was no victory here. There was no redemption. The moon goddess hadn't cursed him. He had cursed himself with his own blinding arrogance. The true mate bond was dead. His legacy belonged to a rival alpha, and his kingdom was built on rotting foundations. "Take your broken army and leave my lands," Marcus commanded, his tone signaling the absolute end of the parley. "I am sparing your life today, not out of mercy, but because killing you is a kindness you have not earned. I want you to live, David. I want you to sit on your crumbling throne, surrounded by the ruin you created, and remember exactly what you threw away. If you or any of your wolves ever cross the frozen river again, I will not stop at the border. I will march on your pack house, and I will leave nothing but graves." David's jaw trembled. He looked at Lyra one last time. The healthy, radiant, perfect heir he had sacrificed his soul to obtain, standing firmly behind the man who had replaced him. Defeated, hollowed out, and utterly broken, the king of the Blood Moon slowly pushed himself to his feet. He didn't say another word. He turned and stumbled out through the shattered doorway, vanishing into the blinding snow. Minutes later, the distant, mournful blast of the Blood Moon retreat horns echoed across the frozen valley. Inside the cabin, the heavy, suffocating tension finally snapped. Lisa let out a long, shaky breath, her knees suddenly feeling weak. Before she could stumble, Marcus was there. He dropped his broadsword to the floor and pulled her into his chest, wrapping his massive arms around her, shielding her from the biting wind howling through the door. "It's over," Marcus murmured into her hair, his heart beating a steady, powerful rhythm against her cheek. "He will never come back." Lyra pushed her way between them, hugging both of their legs tightly. "Papa is strong," she announced with absolute certainty. Lisa looked up into Marcus's stormy gray eyes, finding nothing but warmth, safety, and an unshakable devotion. She reached up, cupping his scarred jaw, leaning in to press a soft, lingering kiss against his lips. It wasn't the magical, electric shock of a fated bond. It was real. It was earned. Yes, Lisa whispered, resting her forehead against his. He is. The choices we make in our darkest moments define the legacy we leave behind. King David sacrificed a love designed by destiny for the illusion of power, only to discover that true strength is not inherited. It is built in the storm. Lisa and Marcus proved that while fate might deal the cards, it is our courage, resilience, and capacity to choose love over despair that ultimately writes the story. Thank you so much for reading He Chose His Pregnant Mistress Over His True Mate. Then, their daughter called another alpha. Father, if this gripping tale of betrayal, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds of chosen family resonated with you, please leave a like, share the story with your fellow fiction lovers, and subscribe for more dramatic, high-stakes romance. Let me know in the comments what you thought of David's ultimate punishment.